Yo, what's up, Knights? Just Rick here, and I'm going to try to cover a topic that seems to have been coming up pretty consistently as of late. And of course, that's the topic of elitism. Recently, I've been seeing large groups of people state that DFO has the worst elitism that they've ever seen in an MMO. And I just gotta say, I've got no idea where these groups of people came from. I've been here literally since the first day of the game's release, joining every manner of pubs for every manner of content. And I've never really experienced this phenomenon where I was truly ready for the content, but people didn't want to take me in their parties. So what's changed recently for people to make these sweeping allegations all of a sudden? And while I personally think that there may be a couple of factors, I believe that the largest is that there is a bit of ignorance when it comes to what is actually expected of someone's gear in order to do endgame content. Yes, since 95 cap, getting epic gear is incredibly easy, but the issue with that is you may fall into the false notion that you're strong enough just with that alone. What you don't realize is that epic gears is just one of many components that contribute to your character's overall strength. It's simply what I'd consider the baseline of your power. After that, you'll need to make a sizable effort towards optimizing that gear and getting other less pronounced but no less important gear in order to actually be considered eligible for endgame content. Let me also make clear that this lack of knowledge for a lot of people is the game's fault. It doesn't really tell you what gear you'll need or how to optimize it, and doesn't do a good job explaining the things that are actually relevant. Because it's other humans that are assembling parties, there is also that bit of subjectivity to it that makes people think that there are no guidelines, and they're just elitists who are out to get them, when in fact there are certain basic criteria that most party leaders are generally looking for. So in episode 3 of the Endgame Gearing Guide, I'm going to try and set everybody straight and lay out the groundwork of what is going to be expected when you're trying to attempt to get into an endgame party. So without further ado, let's go. Before we start though, let me kind of graze on what might be a touchy subject for some people, and I'm just gonna call it as it is: sandbagging. Sandbagging is exactly what it sounds like. You join a party and your contribution to it is that of a sandbag. You aren't contributing anything of use, and in fact you're actually weighing the party down with your presence. God forbid you don't know what's going on and you start getting your entire party killed for it. Nobody, and I mean nobody, wants to lug around sandbags in whatever they're doing if there's no foreseeable benefit. So let this be lesson number 1. Your mindset as someone who is trying to do endgame content is: do not be a sandbag. Now, do not confuse this with the notion that you have to be the strongest guy in the party. No, you just need to be strong enough to contribute something with your presence. This is a gear and knowledge reminder. Try to get a good grasp of the gear that is expected and research how the content is supposed to be completed before you go and try it yourself in a pub. Make no mistake, I don't care how easy some people make it seem, but Tabors and Fiend Wars is endgame content currently. It's on a level that is far and away harder than any of the content that you may have been doing up to and including Harlem Epic gear farming. So with that difficulty spike comes with it a spike in expectations of your gear. If you want to try and skip corners or make excuses on the tip that I'm about to lay down, oh, it's too expensive, I'm trying to save up for this gear is only temporary, why would I spend the money to get that? Whatever your excuse is, I assure you that you will rarely be accepted into endgame parties. This isn't an elitism thing, this is a basic requirements kind of thing, because you aren't doing enough to ensure that you aren't going to be a sandbag for the party if you ignore these guidelines. If instead you simply follow the tips that I'm going to cover, then there will rarely be a party member that will be unwilling to join you, or a party leader out there that would skip out on you. And with that mindset tip out of the way, we can begin proper. Tip number 1, optimize your swap set. My first tip isn't related at all to any of the gear that you currently have equipped. Instead, it's going to be about another set of gear that you should always have available in your inventory, and that is your ever important swap set. You ignore the swap set, it literally doesn't matter what other gears that you might have on. You're not getting into a party ever. Period. A swap set is a set of gear whose sole purpose is to increase the potency of your buff skill. This is done primarily by 2 ways: increasing the skill level, usually up to 10 additional levels, or by unique effects of a gear or set of gears. You access your swap UI by clicking this button here, and you can see that it encompasses all 12 gear slots, your avatars, your pets, and titles. In other words, it's literally a second set of gear, all for this express purpose, which has direct implications to how strong your character can be. You cannot take your swap set set lightly. The best in slot standard swap gear is farmed in Operation Hope here in Harlem. You've got a 9-piece set with your armor, accessories, and weapon, and your option of 3 different 3-piece special equipment sets as well. A document that explains Operation Hope has been left in the description below. The issue with Operation Hope though is that it takes several weeks to farm a complete set, and without the entire set, most of the gear becomes useless as a swap. Because of that, you need to have a lesser swap set to be used in the meantime. And for that, you'll need to resort to the old swap set that is farmed in the St. Horn region by doing the Interdimensional Rift. You then need to buy the correct Chronicle set that is designed to empower your buff skill. You can refer to this document in the description below to find out which one it is for your class, or you can just read your Chronicle set effects and find out which one it is for yourself. For most classes, the actual buff increase comes from a 6-piece set effect, to which I suggest you select these 6 pieces of gear to do just that. The reason for that is it keeps your other slots open for other universally accepted swap options. Any pair of Sea God pants, the level 85 legendary set, will give you +1 to your buff skill, and the high-tech ring from the Melvin Shame quest gives you another +1. Now, why did I leave the weapon and special equipment slots exposed? That was so that you can put the Operation Hope equipment into these slots so that you can get their effects as soon as possible. This is just a path that I would suggest as a beginner, but of course there are countless other options if you do some research. You've still got the level 55 Halidom top for +1, all Halidom weapons give +1, and any other slots can usually have Tainted Chronicle pieces of gear with a green aura imbued onto it that will also fill in the slot to provide any other tiny bit of buff improvements. Now, all this only encompasses your standard gear, however. You've still got the other gear slots to consider as well. Your Avatar top should be there to give you +1. Most people invest in a title that gives at least +2, though these are seasonal, so if you don't have one now, just make sure to get one at the next available chance. If you have rare avatars or special auras, you can put platinum emblems into them to give you up to +3. And finally, your creature can also give you +1 to your swap skill as well. If you're playing a buffing type character, these tips generally don't apply, and instead your swap is simply going to be your epic gear and any additional raw stats that you can muster. Now, in terms of what party leaders are looking for, this is subjective, but let me tell you, it's obvious when consideration was not put into this swap UI or your swap gear. Get the easy levels, get the easy sets, and you're at least trying. Optimizing it with every slot filled with something actually useful for your swap, and you're doing great. But your goal should be striving to finish a complete Operation Hope set. Tip number 2, optimize your weapon. Of all the singular pieces of gear, the weapon is the one that most directly contributes to your damage. For that reason, you've got to make sure it's properly optimized in several ways if you're playing a DPS or synergy character. For percentage damage characters, the weapon needs to be reinforced to +10 at the bare minimum. And for fixed damage classes, I'd say refine 5 at the bare minimum, but since it doesn't cost anything but effort, +8 refinement should always be strived for. The weapon also has to have a high quality, since it contributes to your base stats. I'd say wait until your superior days to buy your weapon, or simply use Kaleido boxes on your weapon until it's of at least exceptional quality. Lastly, you need to have a decent enchantment on it. Personally, I'd strive for the elemental enchantments that are farmed from the Imperial Arena. Now, a lot of people tend to see the weapon as the most expensive part of their gear, and do not wish to expend all this money and resources on a weapon that they may replace soon anyway. And part of me really agrees with this sentiment. Reinforcement especially has a potential to become extremely expensive. For that reason, I personally think it's most economical to only try to get into endgame parties like Tabers only after you have the current best in slot weapon, the Sky's Legacy weapon, first. Now, I realize the conundrum this creates. I'm asking you to have a Sky Legacy weapon before trying to join the content that gives you the materials to purchase it. But all I'm really suggesting is, don't try to get into Taber's pubs until you have a Sky Legacy weapon. By all means, you can do Taber's guide mode or Taber's solo mode until you can purchase it directly. Now, we've also gotten plenty of events that are giving Sky Fragments and Sky Legacy weapons for free, after which then you should invest your resources to be able to meet those guidelines that I've stated. This is also a great opportunity to ease you into this content so that you can learn how to do Tabers on your own first. If you already have a decent weapon that isn't a Sky Legacy, say a level 90 epic, but it has all of my previous suggestions, then I'd say that's good enough. But the key point here is, your weapon needs to be optimized to an acceptable degree. Tip number 3, do you have the Primary Enchantments? Enchantments are these green stats that you can put onto all 12 slots of your standard gear. They come from the effects of monster cards or beads. However, you can't just put any card onto any slot. The enchantment type has to match the gear slot, and because of that, there are some slots that are more pivotal to enchant than others. The pivotal enchantments for non-buffers are your weapon, all 3 accessories, and your magic stone. The reason for that is that they are the slots that can house varying levels of elemental damage. Every 22 elemental damage is about a 10% damage increase, so it straight up cannot be taken lightly. I'd say for Tabers, you should have the 9 elemental damage for your weapon from the Imperial Arena, a +8 elemental damage card for your magic stone, and at least a +13 elemental damage cards for your accessories. These cards are extremely cheap, and upgrading them shouldn't be an issue either due to the Tower of Dazzlement. Other enchantments that I wouldn't ignore are the shoes, belt, and shoulder, but it's mainly due to the fact that they can have critical hit rate on them, which are only necessary if you don't already have 100% crit, a topic that we'll cover in a second. You can get some really cheap critical beads by farming Anton dailies. And you can see right here that Woon is selling a bunch of beads, including 5% crit beads, as well as some sub-equipment beads that I think you shouldn't ignore either. Now the buffers are a little bit different in that their primary enchantments are any slots that could potentially increase their raw buffing stats. For male crusaders, that's everything but weapon, top, bottom, and magic stone. And for the enchantress and female crusader, that's everything but shoulder, belt, shoes, and again magic stone. Now all this being said, however, enchanting all 12 slots of your gear goes a long way in showing that you aren't just putting in the bare minimum into your character. It's also not a very large investment to obtain at least decent cards for all slots, especially the Harlem rare cards, which are designed for that express purpose. There is a handy document linked below that talks about all the enchantments available, which include the best in slot options as well as some cheap alternative options for them. Tip number 4, do you have a full avatar set? And no, I'm not talking about actually participating in Dress Up Fighter Online. I'm talking about advanced and rare clone avatars. They have stats on them which can give you a lot of speed and increase some pivotal skill levels like the aforementioned buff skill. But perhaps even more importantly, they can be made even more potent by having 2 slots on them that can accept emblems. These emblems can give you additional stats like critical hit rate, speed, and raw stats, all of which will go a long way in improving the fluidity of how your character can be played. Crit and speed especially, as these are stats that can't really be made up in the ways that the raw stats can be from your other gear slots. That being said, Crusaders get a ton of mileage off of raw stats, so even more the reason why every single character in this endgame should really have at least a full advanced avatar set, all with some rare emblems in every slot. Sure, it's a non-trivial investment at first, but consider this. I built my advanced set for my monk one time some 4 years ago, and I haven't had to worry about it for a single second since then. One and done, and for the case of some characters, it's gonna feel a whole lot better playing your character after you've done it. That also goes a long way in showing that you actually care about progressing your character. Tip number 5, you need to have a decent title, aura, and creature. Your title, your aura, and your creature are singular pieces of gear which can provide a lot of stats on their own. The thing about them, however, is that all of these types of items are usually seasonal, and it's for that reason that it's quite understandable why some people do not have some things like skill swap titles due to their limited availability. Nobody's gonna blame you either if you didn't bother to purchase the absolute best in slot title, aura, or creature if you already have a relatively close alternative. And I'd even go so far as to say that most people understand that if you're new to the game and don't have some of these things, then there isn't much one can do but wait until a good one gets released. What is going to be unacceptable, however, is not having one of these gears when one is currently available. For instance, if you tried to apply to an endgame raid today and didn't have any aura or title equipped currently, it'd be a huge red flag. The reason for that is the summer packages that are currently on sale come with a very decent title and the current best in slot aura, each of which could be bought individually in the auction hall if you didn't want to go out and get the whole package. Knowing that your character is lacking in those gear slots, it should all of a sudden become priority number 1, and you should focus all of your attention in obtaining them as soon as possible. Again, because these are seasonal items only sold for a limited time. These are the gears that I see people most often try to skimp out on, and part of me understands why. Look at the current best in slot aura, for instance. It's currently going for about 20 million gold at the very least. People might figure, no way, that's way too much gold for one piece of gear, I'm not buying that, and it's just not worth it. And that is precisely the excuse party leaders need in order to not take your character in their parties. And if you were to boil down the stats that the aura provides, it's no wonder as to why this is the case. The elemental damage alone is almost giving you 10% extra damage right there, and that's not even looking at all of the other stats that you're missing out on, like crit damage, raw stats, and a few multicolored emblem slots. If you don't think a decent title, aura, or creature is necessary or worth it for endgame content, then you are sorely mistaken. It's just as important as all of the other standard gear slots. Again, I'm not saying that you need to shell out every single time, always keeping up with the best and strongest gears whenever they come out, but I am saying that you need to have something decent in those slots in order to avoid being a sandbag. Tip number 6, you need to have 100% critical hit rate in dungeon if you are a deeps or synergy character. For most characters, this means you need to have 97% critical hit rate in town, due to the fact that every character in the game has an invisible 3% base crit rate to their character. It should be noted, however, that some characters have passives or buffs that grant crit, but only whilst in dungeon. It's the responsibility of a party leader to know which characters these are and take this fact into account when determining if someone has 100% crit. There's a very useful post on Reddit that has already done all that work for you. Getting max crit is a combination of all of the things that I've already mentioned. The enchantments for your shoulder belt and shoes, all of the emblems that you can put onto your avatars, and things like your title, aura, and creature, as well as the common skills that all of the characters have, are all effective ways to increase your crit. There is literally no excuse as to why you don't have max crit on your character, and not having it is a surefire way to get overlooked when applying. Your critical hit adds 50% damage to the attack, and I hope I don't have to explain why this is not an amount of damage that should simply be left to luck. Tip number 7, prove that you are trying to progress with your character. Now this is the most subjective thing on this list, and I almost considered not keeping it in the script, but to me it's the most important of them all because it encompasses all of what this video is about. You've got to prove that you're trying to progress with your character. Of course, simply following the tips that I've given in this video basically show that you're invested in your character. But there are a lot of other ways that you can display that as well. For instance, maybe your character is a little lacking in some areas, but I see that you shelled out for one of the current best in slot auras. Of course, everyone knows that wasn't cheap, but you did it anyway. It goes a long way in showing that you actually care. Some party leaders like to look at your Explorer Club just to see how many times you've cleared some content, or how many characters that you're gearing up to see how active or dedicated that you are. One of my favorites is people who are wearing a legendary insignia with good gemstones. No, this doesn't do a huge amount to increase your character's damage, but it goes a long way in showing that you think that little boost of damage is indeed worth the effort in getting. If instead you've taken all my tips and did the absolute bare minimum in everything I've said, then it raises the question, are you just trying to squeak into raids? Are you actually trying to progress your character and make them stronger? Simply getting the epic gear is not enough. Your gear and your character need to be optimized to utilize epics effectively. This concept even applies to static groups and people who are more than strong enough for the content already. Remember, the only reason most of us are even bothering to group up and do endgame content is because we all want to progress our characters further. I don't think it's controversial to say that people aren't going to want to party with you if you give the impression that you aren't interested in doing that yourself. And to do that, you need to follow these guidelines and put in a little bit of effort. Tip number 8, test your gear, skill build, and rotation. Now, if you're confident that you've got all the gear and you put in all the extra effort that we've discussed, then I suppose you're completely done with your resume or portfolio. You've covered just about everything that a party leader can gauge about your character just by looking. The last thing I suggest is doing a sense check on yourself by condensing all of your effort into a damage test in the training room. Once inside, you can scroll all the way down to the bottom here for the green sandbag test. It's specifically designed to see how well you can DPS. For the current meta, you want to set the timer to 15 seconds, but once Prey Raid becomes standard, we'll be upping that limit to 20 seconds. Now, it is generally allowed that you can use an undiluted strength or int potion and a Warlord's Cry potion. Any weapon or creature effect is also free game. Precasting skills is a little subjective, but the rule of thumb is just to try to be realistic with a real damage phase during a boss fight. Part of doing well in this test is, of course, your gear, but another perhaps larger part of it is your skill build and skill rotation. I highly suggest that you practice some builds and rotations until you are doing the highest damage that you can at a very consistent rate without really thinking. Try to build some muscle memory to your rotation. Trust me when I say this does wonders in real-world applications. Let me also stress the importance of practicing your rotations, because while you may have the gear necessary to get into parties, it's often apparent when you aren't piloting a character very well. You obviously should research your skills and some skill rotations to practice if you feel your damage isn't where you think it should be with your current gear. For Fiend Lords, it's generally accepted that Deeps characters usually do about 3.5 billion damage in 15 seconds, and Synergy characters need only do 3. However, if you ask me, I'd ensure I'm doing maybe 500 million more than the bare minimum to start really feeling an impact in parties. So in conclusion, do I think elitism actually exists in DFO? Maybe in very small doses. But if you think any of what I've said in this entire video came off as elitist instead of as constructive information, then quite frankly, there's nothing more that can be done for you. At that point, you're just admitting to everyone that you're content with being a sandbag, and that you just want other people to carry you to get you better gear. But the problem with that is, why are you asking people to expend any extra effort for your sake when you haven't done the bare minimum requirements to actually improving your character? Like I keep saying, getting the gear is not enough. Optimizing that gear is key and pivotal to ensuring that you won't be a sandbag. But anyway guys, thanks for watching, and I will catch you nights later.